Good evening, everybody. Edy Poppy's award-winning debut novel, Anatomy.Monotony, is among the most original, readable, and fascinating novels I've encountered in quite some time. As many of you here in Norway already know, Edy writes incisively and provocatively about her own identity, sexuality, and existence in a form that skirts the border between autobiography and fiction. Anatomy.Monotony is about pushing at the limits of sexual and social convention to create one's authentic existence, but it is also about the adventure and challenge of writing itself. I'm also very much looking forward to Edy's next book to be translated into English, which is a short story collection that will be published also, I believe, by the Dalkey Archive Press, which
That's
published
correct, yes.
your first book.
Yeah.
I have a great admiration for Edy Poppy and her work, so I'm delighted to be here to chat with her in her home country. As for me, I'm Rob Doyle. I'm the author of 2 published books so far, a novel called Here Are the Young Men, and a short story collection titled This is the Ritual. My next book, Threshold, will be out next year, and I have also edited an anthology of Irish literature published by the Dalkey Archive Press, this being the big publishing world thing we've got in common. So let's jump straight into it.
Right.
So
Thank you for that introduction.
Oh yeah, welcome.
Very
Anatomy.Monotony is a work of autobiographical fiction, okay? And it's very much based around, by your own admission, based around experiences you had in your first marriage, which was an open marriage. But it's also a novel that's about its own construction. You know, we've got this kind of onion effect of layering. There's a novel within a novel, and the narrator, Var, is also writing a novel titled Anatomy.Monotony.
Yeah.
And I think you said somewhere that it took you around 10 years, correct me if I'm wrong, 10 years to write this one. 7 years, yeah. Okay. Not so far off.
Yeah.
But, well, just tell us a bit about the genesis of this kind of 7 years in the works novel. Did you need to come to the end of the quite complex and, I would say, in some sense, painful and dramatic life experiences that it recounts before you were able to get the necessary distance or even irony, a sense of irony about it? Or were you writing in the heat of these experiences which you dissect and analyze so fruitfully in the novel?
Well, I think it's all of that. I mean, since I spent so many years, I go through different processes. I mean, I thought it started like a short story, because I never thought that I would ever have the patience to write a novel. And so it was going to be part of my short story collection. But then after I had written about 40 pages, my then husband, now ex-husband, said, "I think you're writing a novel." And then I just said, yes. And I sort of accepted it as a novel. And it's interesting, I think, how often I feel that I can have an idea that I want to write a short story, but is this a short story? I think the text or the life which is inspiring the text has to decide, and this definitely, wanted to be more than a short, or not more in the sense of what's better and not in quality, but just in sort of in environment or in characters, or it needed more space, and it started in a funny way, because before that I used to write definitely not autofiction, and I had the more kind of maybe old-fashioned idea that writing is imagination, and so I would use my imagination to imagine all kind of crazy stuff that I had never experienced.
Was this short story?
Yeah, short stories before.
Did you publish these, or was
I published some of them.
Okay.
So that kept me always sort of a little bit warm during these 7 years I was waiting to publish my novel. I got a little bit of, let's say I had this carrot, keeping me going, because it's quite hard to keep your motivation up. And I'm not from an artist family. I had never met a writer before became a published writer myself. So I'm just from this little small village in Bø in Telemark. So it sounded like a crazy idea anyway that I stopped all my studies to just not have a plan B and just become a writer. So if I hadn't had a little sort of publication along the way, mostly in English actually, when I was living in London, but also a little bit in Norway, I think I might have, not have had the courage. I needed encouragement because for me it was like so scary or so demanding. I think people are different. Some people find it very funny to write. I mean, I also find it funny, but I also find it very painful. But just to say a bit more about what you asked, so I remember one night that my ex-husband, then husband, was not coming home because he was with a lover, and I couldn't sleep. And so I just started to write about that. And then at that period, I was working, more in the evening in a theater, in a musical theater, and he was working more in the day. So I wrote in the night, and then I wrote in the day, and then when he came back, I was going to work. And so I just left my computer open, and I went to work, having written about reality as it was happening that night. And it was the first time that I ever did something like that. And so I remember going to work and also being really scared, like, what will happen now? How will my husband react, to him becoming a character, and will he like it?
So you were so sure he was going to read it?
Yeah, I kind of left it there, I kind of left it as an invitation, left it open.
Yeah.
And so when I came home from work, I was sort of scared. But then he was like really supportive. And I write about that in the book as well, how her husband, Vår, or Ragnhild's husband, is reading her work throughout the work and commenting on it. And
kind of getting a kick out of it, or that was how I read it.
Yeah.
Was that true in reality, that he was kind of playfully enjoying the process of seeing himself becoming fictionalized?
Absolutely, and he was always fighting for that Lou character. Or all the people in the book have two names, because as you said, there is the book written in the first person that I am writing, and then there is Anatomy.Monotony that my character is writing. And she's giving all the people in her life another name, to make them into fiction. So she's a mirror of me, like how she's reflecting my process, but in the fiction are most of the real names, like my birth name, Ragnhild, appears in the novel, within the novel. But I also want to say something more about this process of these 7 years, because of course if someone had said to me, it will take you 7 years to write this book, I don't think I would ever have done it. I thought it would take me a year, and that sounded like a whole life already. A year, And so first it was written very much as life was happening. And I sometimes had to wait for life to happen as well. So the process was like one-to-one. And in a way you can call that warm writing. Not so intellectual, more just happening. But then after a while, and I sent it to publishers and I got some feedback, they were seeing the sort of quality of the material, but they were asking for the distance. And so after a while, I was behind life. Let's say that life had happened, and I was going back to working on the beginning of the novel with the distance. So I did no longer have to wait for life to happen.
Was the marriage still?
The marriage lasted throughout the whole novel.
But including this period of distance afterwards?
Yes. Until the publication of the novel, and even for a year or so after, the marriage was still on. It's only like in this American English publication that happens like 13 years almost. I think it's 13 years after the original one. Then my life has changed completely, and the reading of it too, because now I'm married. I'm not married, but I am now with this wonderful man here, Julian Blaue, and I have a family with him, and he has helped me sort of recontextualize the novel. So whereas in the original one, the dedication was just for my husband, who has given me everything, even what I didn't want. that was the original dedication. And then 13 years later, Julian Blaue made his sort of, let's say, not appearance in the book, but somehow, because he came with this nice parenthesis in a way. He's now my ex-husband. Yes. So 13 years later, the life has changed, but he's the godfather of my son, so, and I'm the godmother of his daughter. So life can go in different ways, and for me, I just want to say this one thing about open marriage, because I find it interesting when you have an open marriage, and then when you divorce, you know, after being together for 16 years, then people say, oh, it was not such a good idea then, this open marriage. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We were together for 16 years. I don't know many, from the age of 17, you know.
Well,
and so I'm like, I don't know many people who have. It was a success, you know, 16 years. But I think it's this tendency that when you live a little bit off the norm, then people would love it to be a mistake because it's somehow threatening. But I see so many people living in so-called closed marriages, and if they leave each other, the whole idea of closed marriages is not in crisis. So I found it interesting. So for me, the parenthesis, he's now my ex-husband, doesn't mean that the book is not a positive, or it's not that, it doesn't make it into a tragedy. I mean, whatever life you choose, it has its difficulty and its beautifulness, and you can, that will be anyway, so you just have to kind of choose which kind of difficulty are you interested in and which do you want to avoid. Anyway, you can't avoid it completely. So yeah, so it started as a diary and then became more and more fiction, because just this little thing, because I started to realize also that factual fiction didn't capture my sentiments, didn't mirror the experience. I needed to like break through the facts and find the emotional truth.
Oh yeah, I remember you discussed this quite interestingly in the interview you did with Siri Hustvedt.
Yes.
And I think you both, and it struck me as I read that I think, if I remember correctly, you would both come to more or less the same conclusion by your very, different lives in writing and your different approaches to writing. I'd come to this idea that the only truth that matters in a piece of fiction, a piece of writing, whether it's so-called autofiction or more traditional fiction, is this emotional truth.
Yeah.
It's interesting that taking this route of very explicitly autobiographical fiction and writing, you would reach that. I guess it's a conclusion that most novelists, whatever their field, kind of hit upon at some point or another. The idea that it's, no matter how closely you're cleaving to your own lived experience, it's something needs to be edited down, and the experiences still need to be shaped and refined in such a way that they have the impact on the reader that isn't just the kind of formless chaos of life. That's
you have to make it readable in a way, because life as it is, it's not very readable.
Oh, it's a banal sequence of sensations and phenomena.
So many random things. Or it was just in the first edition of my book, the first draft, it was just so many characters, because there were so many people in my life, and then I had to sort of blend them together. Who do I need to tell the story? How much can I cut away? Can these three people become one?
Yeah.
So it's all about like finding, I always start very broad and then I like cut, almost like a sculpture. Like I had this sort of epiphany at one point, because I was writing, and then I was working for an artist at the time, Holly in the book, the painter.
Oh, yeah.
And she said to me once, she said, oh, you're so lucky, because when I paint you and I make a mistake, I fucking made the mistake, and I could ruin the whole painting. But you're able to like write, and then you can get back to how it was. And at that point, I had never thought about that. When I changed, it was changed. And from that moment, I remember going back home after the conversation with her, and going home and making a new document out of the old one, just calling it the destruction document. And then thinking, I have made a stone this book is a stone, but it's a beautiful stone. I know it's a good material, but it's still just a stone. I have to find a figure. And then I closed myself. I had maybe 200 pages or something. And I closed myself in my room for some days. And I felt like a maniac, you know, like, wow, like it was very physical, like, destroying and cutting and pulling, putting it around. And then after a week or something, I had 30 pages, you know, and from these 30 pages, I started to build out again. So that's a lot of my process, you know, like adding, cutting, 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 till it just says click. At one point, it's and then leave it and don't touch it anymore.
When you talked about the fact that you never thought you would have the stamina or the interest to write a novel, and you know you thought it was going to be a short story, I remembered that your narrator Vara says something, if memory serves, something very similar in the novel. She says something like, if people had any idea of how much effort and time it takes to write a novel, they'd never start in the first place.
Yeah.
Which is,
I think that's true for so many things.
Yeah.
For almost anything to do with art, but also children. I mean, my God. It's so good that we don't know the crazy work that it comes with having a child. I mean, you can compare it. It's like, but then you do it and you don't regret it. I mean, I absolutely don't regret spending 7 years, you know, and 7 years doesn't mean like standing up at 7 in the morning. It's not like from you know 8 till 4 every day. It's like 7 years of writing is also 2 years of not writing, and 1 year in crisis, and another 6 months of thinking I'm not going to ever write a single word ever. You know, like all this is included in that process. So not writing is as important as writing, and deleting is one of the most important things. So therefore, sometimes you have to, you know, I have this. I teach writing as well, and I have this. It's a surrealist exercise called automatic writing, but I call it puking. You know, get it all out, and then erase as much as you can.
See what's left.
Yeah. So my goal was always to make the book as short as possible. So therefore, I'm also surprised that it ended up like, how many pages is it? It's quite big actually.
340.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah. But maybe after 7 years and then writing and cutting, then it's still very short compared to like all the words I actually wrote. Yeah.
Let's stay on this question of autobiography in general for a moment, and of identity. And I feel that in your work and your life, there's a real sense of boundaries being blurred, and of a layering, like you talked about even in the novel. There are every character has at least two names. And, you know, your own name ends up in there. And actually, you know, I've been reading your work and I've gotten to know you for a while now, but only when I was kind of researching, you know, I was preparing for this actual talk that I realized that Edy Poppy isn't even your own real name. It's an artistic name, it's a pseudonym, which I had no idea about. So, and you know, you even now in your marriage or relationship to Julian, there's a sense of, I feel, collaboration, and you know, sometimes it's hard to see where one's work ends and the others begin. And so when I meet you as a person, on one hand, I have a sense that you're a very authentic, very sincere person, very straight, forward, and so on. But at the same time, there's this. It seems to be you take much delight in a kind of playful fusing together of life and art, whereby sometimes it's hard to tell one from the other, if you see what I mean.
No, I don't know if I know exactly what you mean. Are you wondering if I'm telling the truth?
No, not at all.
What do you mean?
Not at all. Well, I guess I was going to say that, so as you said, it's been maybe 13 or 14 years since you've written this, and it's clear that your interest in autobiographical writing has in no sense died away. In fact, it's probably deepened, I guess, and it's expanded out into other forms of art and into collaborations and so on.
Performances.
Exactly, And I guess the question I have is, Well, I just want you to tell me a bit about this, the link between art and life as it applies to you. I certainly wasn't suggesting that it was some form of deception, but I guess, do you, as you deepen your interest and your engagement with autobiographical writing, do you feel that, is there a separation between how you live and your writing, and does one inform the other?
If
they influence each other in some fruitful or other way.
I mean, definitely. I mean, I feel there are many questions I want to answer here. But what I find really beautiful for me in writing so close to my life is the fact that I'm forced to have an interesting life. You know, and that's a good thing to be forced to. You know, like I cannot just stop. You know, and think that's it. You know, I'm 44 now, and I can just live in my memory. No, I have to always be in movement. You know, in my new love story, my new family, I have to continue to explore, and I love that sort of demand that my kind of work is asking of me.
Yeah.
I also find it very interesting, this with authenticity or reality, especially as you are mentioning my name. I mean, one thing that was really important for me with choosing an artist name is that I'm not from an artist family, and I felt like my art starts with me. I don't come from like, I'm not a part of a tradition, I'm not like taking something further on. Of course I'm inspired by how I grew up and whatever, you know, but I wanted it to be like a statement. It starts here, it's mine for better or for worse, it's my success, it's my failure, whatever, you know, like it's mine, I take total responsibility. But I also found like my bird name, Ragnhild. You know, for me, I like that name, but I didn't recognize myself in that name. And you know, I thought, is that the truth? People often come and think that if they say my birth name, then they will speak to the real me. But what does that mean? What is the real me? I mean, Ragnhild is a fiction from my parents. It's their dream, you know, of me. And then what am I? You know, maybe Edy Poppy then is my dream of me, or my sort of, when I hear that name, I feel more seen, you know.
Yeah.
Like it's like a title of a book, you know, a name is like a title of a book. Does the title reflect what's inside? You know, and my parents had no idea what was inside the book, you know, and like I don't have an idea what's inside the book of my children, I can only guess, and I have given them my artist name. Let's see if they rebel against it, you know, or if they take it further. But for me, it was interesting to, you know, I think they come from an artist family, but do they want to? I don't know.
Interesting, this idea that perhaps the self is always a story, is always a fiction, even before one learns to tell it oneself. So initially, it's the fiction of the story that's told by the parents.
Yeah, the name, it's like a wish.
Yeah.
When the parents give you a certain name, it comes with a certain connotation. Nothing is neutral.
Yeah.
So I find it like, anyway, even in a normal conversation, if we have a conversation, I will tell you about my life and you will tell me about your life, we still have to edit, because it's impossible to tell the whole life. We would spend the whole life to tell the whole life. So this thing about reality and fiction is anyway very, very hard. And I think, but the story, the angle that you choose, either, you know, consciously or subconsciously to tell your story from, whichever, everybody's telling their story all the time. I mean, it's just the human has a constant need for stories to understand. But I think it could be an interesting experiment for people to try to tell their story from another angle, because it influences a lot how you feel, you know, the position, the elements that you include and the elements you take out. So I think like your life story, mine or anyone here, should be questioned from time to time. You know, is the life story still reflecting, you know, either how I feel or what I want to focus on? So for me, storytelling is really interesting in that sense. It's not neutral. It also makes reality.
Maybe that would be a very good time for you to read us a bit of your story.
Yeah.
There are still many things I want to ask you about, but if you could give us a little flavour of your
Right. I will read a little Maybe I'll read a little sexual extract here from the beginning of the novel, where Vår, the main character, has encountered a stranger and has decided to meet him again. The stranger is very direct, asked, "Are you one of those women who only want to make love in a bed, indoors?" "No, of course not." I laugh. The question caught me offhand. I like it. I soften. I say, "What an absurd idea to limit your sex life to a bed." The stranger admits that he enjoys making love outside in the most bizarre places, claims that he's very inventive, attentive. He knows all the nooks and crannies in this town, London by night. He takes it for granted that I want to. And after a few drinks, she does want to. So a few pages later, it comes like this. He takes my hand and then we're off somewhere in Shoreditch, between Old Street and Hoxton Square. I wonder if the clarity I feel is just a trick of the alcohol. I squat behind a car and pee. "Here it is," he shouts. "Here." We have to close the door and walk down a flight of stairs before we find ourselves in a small gateway. We're outside, we're hidden. We're right next to the back door of a restaurant. Cars often drive past. We hear people talking and what they're talking about. It's embarrassing, the banality of their conversation. As if the content had no meaning, just served as social function. I wonder if the stranger and I, He asked me just to forget about them. There's a rusty stove in the stairwell that's making it very hot. I'm sweating. His skin is dark, black almost. I can only just see him. Together we are black and white, like in an old film. I'm naked except for a jacket. "Have you ever made love to a black man before?" he suddenly asks, a little too loudly. "Yes," I whisper back. I try to balance his loud voice with my weak one, neutralizing them. He gropes me, puts his fingers deep inside me, licks them, and then he wants me to lick them too. When we kiss, it feels like I'm kissing my own sex. I recognize that bittersweet, unfathomable taste, like the sea, salty, like sweat, sweet. He likes it, can't get enough, licks me dry, swallows. I'm impressed by the size of his member. It's one of the biggest I've ever seen. He sticks his tongue into my ear and whispers that it's my turn to make him wet, use my mouth. I try, but his member is too big. I think it'll choke me. Like me, he sweats a lot. He turns me in all directions, front and back, says loudly that he likes my ass, kisses it, wants to know if someone has kissed my ass before, licked it. Yes, often I whisper and ask him to keep his voice down. But when he enters me, I'm the one to scream. He stops, surprised, and asks if it hurts. No, men are never brutal enough with me, I insist. He's almost tender. After the stranger has taken me 3 times, I want a cigarette. But the stranger doesn't smoke, and I have none left. It's time to go home. I look around, look for my things, feel nauseous. It's light outside, almost morning. People are on their way home or to a Nashville. The birds are chirping. The stranger asks what I'm looking for. My husband's trousers, I whisper. They're lying on the top of the stairs. A man's blue striped trousers, flea market trousers. The strangers give them to me. Stands quite still naked, horny, asks, "Do you often meet men while wearing your husband's trousers?" Yes, it makes me feel safe, I answer honestly. I can see that the stranger doesn't like it. I put my foot into one trouser leg, but when I'm about to put the other one in, the stranger stops me, insists that he hasn't had enough, wants me to come home with him, wants us to keep going everywhere in his flat, down a staircase, on the top of a table, the kitchen table, tempts me by telling me he's a good cook, that we can eat, and then go on making love after, repeats again and again that he hasn't had enough. I answer that I'm like most women, that I always want something, a profit. I put on the rest of my clothes, quickly, socks and shoes, and then I leave. I run.
Okay, Okay, in fact, that reading leads quite perfectly to my next question, which is about this very issue of sexuality.
Yeah.
And it seems, as the reading you've just given us demonstrates, you write quite frankly and explicitly about sexuality. And I guess the book as a whole, maybe your writing as a whole, but the novel in particular, are provocative in the sense that the novel really dives headlong into a form of living out one's sexuality that many people, maybe even most people, would find challenging or daunting or frightening even. It's a sort of brutalist, avant-garde experimentalism brought into the sexual arena, and these characters are living it out, and they're gaining something from it, and they're also suffering in various ways from it. And you explore this with this kind of forensic, almost scientific detachment at times. But it's a broad question, really. I love to read dirty books. It's a lifelong pleasure. But have you always been interested in writing about sexuality? Is it something you think you will continue to do? I mean, we'll talk about your future writings.
Well, I mean, my interest in sexuality comes from being completely uptight and absolutely scared of sexuality, and especially talking about it. I used to be extremely shy, and nothing would be more embarrassing than sexuality. So, but once you have a problem or whatever, I find problems, unless they're really too big, but within manageable, I find problems a gift in a way, because they're interesting to explore. I would never write about sexuality if it was just easy peasy for me, because then there would be nothing to find out. I would be just comfortable, and that would be it, and I could write about something else. So I don't know how it happened, like growing up in the 70s, being born in the 70s.
What was the culture like then?
Well, it's the 70s is quite open-minded. I mean, then we went into the 80s, but there was nothing around me that was very moralistic. But still, I felt like as if I was brought up by nuns or something. And I don't know where that came from.
Was it a rural thing, or was it just
I
a
think
familiar
it was just,
thing?
it was a personal thing.
Yeah.
That I was, I don't know where I got it from, because I don't think it was not my parents wouldn't talk so much about sexuality, but my aunts would talk about it constantly, So, and they're very free, so I think I got uptight totally by myself. I don't have anybody to blame for it. But still, with this uptightness, I moved to France, the country that symbolizes, sexuality, liberty, ménage à trois, and the contrast was really interesting, clash, and so from having a very poor vocabulary to talk about these things in Norwegian, either very vulgar or very uptight. I didn't like my sexuality so much within those words, and then I came to France, and then they seemed to be just like so interested in finding all kind of words and ways and philosophies to describe sexuality. And
their whole literature.
Yeah, exactly. It's like based on it. And Margaret that I mentioned in my novel, she's one of my literary mothers. She's always exploring it, and Bataille. There are so many. And that changed my sexuality as well. And I became really interested in sort of, finding a language for that experience in Norwegian, which I find is a language not suitable for it. But the fact that I don't find it suitable makes it even more interesting, to use it. And what I like about sexuality as a theme, and why I think I will never stop writing about it, first, it's like something that most people have, and it's one of the most beautiful things you can ever experience, but it can also be the most horrible thing you can ever experience. So it has this range, you know, it can bring you so close to someone, but it can also make you so distant from someone, you know, and it, you know, you can have sex with somebody and you can ignore each other in the street the next day. I find that fascinating. You've been naked together and you don't even want to have anything to do with each other. You know, with some people, you know, it's like a total language that you can communicate and it's wonderful. And with other people, it's like the bodies are not fitting. You know, you can't communicate. And I find it's an interesting rebellious force as well. I think like if you would take sexuality away from humans, it would be much easier to control them. You know, and this is like this one rebel force for good and bad, because it really is for good and bad. It goes in all directions, but it's one of the animal things that we haven't managed to like completely lock in, and that makes somebody sleeps with the enemy, or you know, all these things, and so therefore I find that through it, and I also find it interesting like the conversations you have afterwards or don't have afterwards. It's a lot about that in the book, like how you know, sexuality or can be a shortcut, you know, to intimacy and to really talking about essential things. So I find it's like unlimited, and also interesting to get older, because what is sexuality as I age? I want to explore that also with words, because
Let me read you a quote, which is following on very much from this, from Anatomy.Monotony. So, she, Var, has just slept with this lover character. I throw myself over him, but he doesn't want to make love now. Wait, are you happy with your husband? He asks instead. Yes. I light a cigarette. I hesitate. Usually, I answer, because now and then we hurt each other. It's through suffering you grow, through happiness you rest. I'm saying this, hoping it's true, which jumped out at me, this quote. But again, if we can kind of collapse the line to an extent between art and reality, art and life, do you feel that this Lou, the husband character, is reading Nietzsche, like the Bible. You know, he's reading thus spoke Zarathustra almost as a self-help guide to living out your sexual life and your existence. And Var herself, they're both living this very, as I say, at times brutal, very risky, very flamboyantly dangerous. They're living dangerously, even recklessly. They're taking risks with themselves. And with others, and with emotions, and with some very dark energies, and so on. And this kind of anarchic force of sex that you just highlighted. And would you say that you yourself, as a person, not so much as an author, but as a person, are still attracted to this kind of self-overcoming, Nietzschean, risky approach to existence, to living? Or is it something
I think these things go in waves as well. And now I'm in a new relationship, I have children, and I think it's important to that we have to find out together, Julian and I, you know, what do we want to explore, you know, like that he's not just inheriting my old marriage and has to go on there, but what can we be, and how can we be alive, and how can we explore things, and you know, I guess in this marriage, the first one in the book, it's like they meet very young, and they also don't have so much experience, so they need to gather experience. They need to also fall in love, each one of them, because it's very, you know, you meet at 17 and 19, which is when I met my ex and when the characters are meeting, so very young. And even if it's like you say, they take risks, but on the other hand, you can say the opposite, that it was a very clever move from my ex-husband, because through opening up the marriage, I didn't have to leave him to explore life, you know. Normally this kind of young love lasts for a couple of years and then you have to try something else, you know.
Yeah.
And somehow it made us stay together. And now I'm interested in, like, I'm always interested in the subject of love and how, you know, we've been together for 5 years now, you know, what can it be? Can it include others? Do we want to do it together? You know, do we have to become more straight just because we have children? I don't think so. Children are not moralistic, you know. So I'm in the middle, you know, of exploring what can it be now? What do I want to? It's also about what do I want to find out, or what do I want to experience with Julian. So that's what my next book will be partly about.
Okay. Tell us, I was going to wait till after, but since it's come up, can you tell us a bit more about that? I think you said before that you've been writing it for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, it seems like I think I'm one of those writers that will spend a lot of years on every project, especially since it's so connected to life. But so I'm always writing more projects at a time, you know, like. But this project has been in my circulation for quite some years. And actually, talking about autofiction, because and now I'm getting a bit like emotional here, because there's just been an event that has maybe, that I didn't think would be a part of my book, but that might change it completely. Because, well, it's exploring, you know, family life and artist life and sexuality. But I met Julian then at a point where he was was going to get a child with somebody else, and we met in that very, what can you say, in a very sensitive or important moment in a life, and then our love was so strong that Julian left his girlfriend and went with me. But his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend is an amazing open spirit, and so she sort of opened up, and I was even part of the birth of the first child. And
you became close friends.
Yeah, so we became friends, and she always opened up, and for a very long time, or I think we were just like such a, in a way, proof that. Yeah, what seems to be that the worst catastrophe can be the most beautiful thing, and she always also wanted to have a close relationship with us, for our son to see us, and she's a very like she wrote her master on Georges Bataille, and so she also liked the subject, and she read my first book before we ever met, so she was really in those subjects about sexuality and transgressionism. So in this sense, she's a sister soul. And but then we just found out that she's dying, and she's still alive, but she's gonna die in a few days. And so so this is like an emotional thing that we are dealing with, and talking about autofiction, you know, like, should I include that? How does that change the whole way of writing and looking at the story? At the same time, I also feel like I have had many discussions with myself the last days, you know. What would be in her honor to write about it? Because it was also a suicide attempt, so it's all those taboos. Would it be in her honor to write about it or to not write about it? But I think I have to see. But at the moment I'm in this thought. But if I think I should honor her, I have to take the whole of her, and also I think she would love to live forever, also in a book and in memories. And so life has come and sort of knocked me totally of my, what can you say, of what I would ever expect, because, and sort of it's maybe continuing to writing it, at the moment I don't know what that writing will eventually look like, and how it will influence when I go back and look at what I have already written. How will it influence? For sure it will do something to the whole thing. So in a way she's a co-writer by this act, or so
huge.
Yeah, somehow I feel like this whole conversation is also somehow in her honor, because we're talking about all the subjects that she loves.
And that she studied.
And that she studied,
engagement.
And that I think, because at some point I thought, can I not do this talk maybe? But then I thought, no, she would like it. She would be the first one to be here. You know, that's the kind of talks that she would go to.
Yeah.
So So I also want to do it for that reason. Yeah.
Just reversing it back just a little bit, just to stay on this new book though. It seems like family is a big part of it. Is it in the sense that while writing this, you were very much writing about the process of making oneself into a writer?
Yeah.
You know, altering one's engagement with reality and existence, so that writing becomes your way of processing it and making it coherent. So I'm kind of semi-guessing now, but is it something like the new one is, the one you've been working on is kind of asking about what it means to live that life in the context of starting a family and raising a family and so on?
Sorry, what's the question?
So the new book, is it very much kind of an exploration of what it means to, in the sense that this was a book about turning oneself into a writer and using writing as a way to kind of come through life, you know? Is the new one a continuation of that investigation through the context of raising a family and having a family, like an investigation of what it means to try to write?
Yes, in that sense, absolutely. I find it really interesting. Like, you know, I waited a long time to have children. I only got my first child when I was 40, and bought the me character in the first book. She's like, I don't want children. She's definitely not into that, and I was also not into that for a very, very long time, because it felt like a threat towards art.
Okay.
And I was very fearful of
It's a common fear, isn't it, among artists and writers?
Yeah, exactly, because you hear all these stories about people who got children early, and then they have this, what I could have done if I didn't make you. And I thought, I'd never want to have that story. I never want to make a child and then be angry with that child because I didn't realize my dream. So I look at my first two books as children. You know, I needed to make two book children first, and I always thought if I had written two books, then I can think about if I can also make children in the flesh and not only in paper, because then I think like I'm so into my thing that it's not going to threaten it. And so for me, I think like one of the things I do explore in my writing is different models for living. And I think, you know, one was the open relationship, exactly, one is the open relationship, and now I find also like there are not so many available models for how to be a family, or the model is very conformist, especially like in Scandinavia, you know, of how we should do it, and when they should get up, when they should go to bed, and what they should dress like. I mean, it's, you know, so I think when people see Julian and me taking our kids, you know, on a world tour, I think it inspires them, you know, oh, can you also have kids in that way? And I find, like, for instance, my son, he's so confident, and I wondered, like, where the hell did he get that confidence from? And I think he got it from Rio de Janeiro, because when he was like 6 months old, he was with us in Rio de Janeiro, and everybody was just giving him an amazing feedback, like, wow, how cute, how beautiful, like it was like a song in his head, you know, as we were walking down. And I think he just, ooh. And so it gave him like, people were so communicative, and I think like this traveling around, you know, I think children, the idea that children needs routine and safety, it's true, but how do you interpret it? What safety and routine is, you know? You can have a safety and routine that you can travel with, and so that's in a way one of my missions to try to like showing by doing also, so it doesn't just become words, you know, like by living a life, a certain kind of life. I'm just showing something. You can take some part from it, you can be inspired, you can be the opposite, but at least like it's another model.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that nobody ever did really like
No,
live, but
yeah.
but it's just I think we just need more stories like that.
Yeah,
And I feel like
it's
it's
a very
wonderful.
rich territory to explore.
Yeah.
And almost as if this one was proposing or investigating an alternative form of marriage.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
sounds like you were
Yeah, now
riding
it's
towards investigating alternative forms of familyhood question, which is so scary, as I say, for so many artists and
Yeah.
artists and so on.
and like for instance when we were, because we have been, Julian and me, having a performance in this wonderful art space gallery here before, and then I was, my second child, she was, under a year, so I was home. So, but what we did then is like, I think you can always find a way. So when they were sleeping, we were bringing them in like their wagons to where we could rehearse, and then we just rehearsed in the night when they slept, and then without them noticing, we brought them back. So if there is a will, there is a way,
Yeah,
I think that's important, and I want to write about that, how
Yeah.
you can make a beautiful, you always want to give your children the life you want, so
Yeah.
I find like, I want to do so many I never traveled with my family, my first travel was when I was 17 and moved to France, and my son loves New York and he's just 4, and I don't know what that will do with him, that he will find out himself, but I give him what I think is a good life, and they will give their children or friends or lovers what they think is a good life. And so, yeah.
Okay. I'm hoping we might have a couple of minutes for some questions from the audience at the end, but maybe before that you could give us another reading.
Guess it should be quite short because I
Really.
can see here that we are approaching the end. But yes, it's going to be a little piece about writing and also about the difficulty of sometimes, you feel something, but what you express and what comes through is like the opposite. So, I would love to write more about all the fine things between Lou and myself. Lou is the husband. All our discussions, kisses, fucks, things that really make me laugh, our dreams. I would love to write about how wild and mad I am about him, that he can make my face blush up to my ears, how he inspires me, how wise I think he is, things like that. His sensitive nipples, his flat stomach, his curly hair, his dominating nature, his almost slanted eyes, green-brown, changing according to his mood, and his ears sticking, stretching towards something, his inquisitiveness, because Lou has a good ear for music. Those are the kind of things I want to talk and think about, all the good things, because they are so much stronger. But then Lou says something that hurts me, and the tears come, the bitter taste. Then I hit back, then we fight, are mean to each other, play with feelings, say ugly, repulsive, painful things, and then I can't think about all the good things any longer. Then I can only remember the anger, how stupid I think he can be as well, my intense need to liberate myself. Then I remember the cigarette breath in the morning, and that his teeth have almost turned brown because of tobacco. To scrape off the stained enamel with scissors is madness, I tell him straight out. Don't even think about doing that. But he does it anyway. I smell the sweat from his armpits, see his dirty hair, think about all the betrayals, his love for others. Suddenly I only remember ugly things, and my anger gives me the courage to write in a way that happiness never manages to do. Lou says, I want to humiliate myself completely, go down on my knees, take you in my arms. For a second, that's all I can think about. The kiss we may perhaps exchange. I hope, but then you come into the room. You don't look at me. Your voice is cold, uninterested. I say something you don't hear, don't register, mumble something to break the silence. Then I, too, look another way. I don't kiss you, don't take you in my arms. You go out again, and I didn't get to say anything at all.
Thank you. Maybe we have time for just one or two questions, if anyone has any from the audience. If not, I can ask you a few more. Anybody got any questions for Edy?
And remember, there are no bad questions, there are only stupid answers. Yes, there is somebody at the end here.
Ja, du underviser i skrive. Hvor er det du underviser, og så gjør om du har tatt utdannelse i det selv, eller helt selvlært?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna, so that you know, she's asking about my teaching. Well, I'm really autodidact, so I'm very old-fashioned. I did like the school of life, you know, like very old-fashioned writer. So when I was first asked to write, to teach writing, I thought, how can I teach writing? And then I just thought, well, how do I write? So I started to analyze what I do and use that as a method. So I'm teaching quite a few places. I'm teaching at Westerdals, the high, what do you call it, kind of university in Oslo. I'm teaching at the writing school in Bø, my village. I've been teaching at the art academy in Trondheim. And then I've done workshops, like when I was in Ireland, I did a workshop, you know, like around the world. But those are like my main arenas.
Maybe here in the future?
Yeah,
Maybe.
hopefully.
Yeah.
I think that somebody should hire me.
Where did you teach in Ireland? I didn't know you.
Well, I mean, I had a writing at the Trinity Centre. I had a writing, what do you call it? Some hours, like a writing workshop. Yeah. So that was also like a cool experience. Yeah.
Thank you to Rob for coming all the way from Berlin to interview Edy Poppy. It was so nice to hear you on stage. Interesting. So thank you so much.
Thank you.